Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Thursday of our film festival. This is Hannah McCarthy. Hannah McCarthy is the director of creative services. Got two people in the waiting room. Hannah McCarthy is the director of creative services for Alamo Drafthouse Cinemas based in Austin, Texas. Prior to joining Alamo Drafthouse, Hannah worked at Rooster Teeth Productions, a digital studio within Warner Media, working in development through post-production on projects that run the gamut of scope, medium, and distribution. Hannah's experience spans across digital and linear platforms, appearing on major cable networks, as well as premium digital SVODs such as HBO Max, Discovery Channel, A&E, TNT, Animal Planet, TLC, and PBS. Great. We're so excited to have you today, Hannah. You can take it away.
All right, great. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. I know it's early in the day. I was saying it before some of you trickled in. I did not choose the early time. I would have picked a later time for all of you. I know you have schoolwork and hanging out with your friends, and getting up early is not the first thing you want to do. So I appreciate you being here. I kind of was touching on it too. Like, a lot of what I want to talk about today is just careers in the creative industry. I think there's a lot of assumptions about what they look like, how you can get into them, and kind of there can be a pretty narrow focus when you are getting started in this kind of industry and trying to figure it out. And I will say, I'll kind of give you a little background about myself. I've got my very rudimentary slide deck here for you all. A little bit about me. I was a English major with a double major in LCST, which I don't think they do anymore. I'm really going to show my age at multiple points in this presentation, so forgive me that. But they didn't have a film major when I was at William & Mary. They do now, which is great. They didn't when I was there. We had to cobble one together, and that's what I did. When I graduated, I went and I worked at a production company in Washington, D.C., and then I moved to Austin, and I've been there for about 10 years. As it was mentioned, I am the director of creative services for the Alamo Drafthouse. I can talk about what that is later. And I foster cats. That's not really relevant, but I like to bring it up because it's a big part of my life, and I enjoy cats. And I didn't for a long time, so nobody cares about that, but I could talk about that a lot. So also, just I'm gonna ramble. I'm a rambler. But toward the end, I would love to reserve time if anybody has questions. I'm definitely would love to do like Q&A questions toward the end. So just keep questions in mind as we're talking. I probably won't be able to read the comments because I have like 5 windows open, but would love to get to questions at the end. Now that I've just said that, I probably won't be able to read things. I'm going to pull the chat up now. I would love to know, you can just drop it in the chat. You can unmute if you want, but I know that's always annoying when people are like, oh, anyone? I would love to know about you all. I would love to know if you are, what you're majoring in, what year you are, what areas of focus you're interested in, because that'll kind of guide maybe some of how I talk about things later on. So if you want to, please just drop in the chat sort of what you're studying, what you're interested in, maybe what some career goals you might have, or areas of career pursuit you'd be interested in. I would love to know that because it makes a difference. So please, if you feel like it, drop that in the chat. I would love to know it. But generally, like I said, I wanted to talk about creative careers, particularly for me in film, TV, digital media, mainly because that's where my experience tends to lie. That doesn't mean that this doesn't apply to other parts of the sort of creative industries like journalism. Things like that are still definitely relevant, but I'm going to look at this largely through the lens of film, TV, digital content, that kind of stuff, because that's where my background is. I'm looking through the comments really quickly just to see. I love this. This is great. We got different. Okay, so we've got some seniors, we've got some sophomores. We've got, oh my gosh, you guys are so cool. There's so much going on here. Okay, awesome. Staff. We've got all kinds of things. I love this. And we're going to talk about I love how people are saying, long-term goals, even things that I would not use the word pipe dream. You never know what's possible. There's all kinds of things that are possible. And how you're all studying or focusing on different things and how you're going to apply them. And I love all of this. Okay, great. I'm getting distracted because you're all very interesting, but we'll come back to that. So this is where we're kind of going to start. There's the traditional expectations of what working in film and TV looks like. It is usually one of these 6 things. It is you're going to be a writer, a producer, a director, an editor, a DP, or an actor. That's kind of when people think about working in film and TV, it's probably one of these things. And those are great places to start. Those are also really like fairly high up in they're pretty much the highest things you can get in hierarchy of the creation of content. And so what I like to ask people is, when you think about if this is your end goal, first of all, these are not the only end goals, but if these are, thinking about all the other things that come before these positions, all the other things that are the building blocks to these positions. But also keeping in mind that the expectation is, if I want to work in film and TV, I can do one of these 6 things. There's so much more than that. And I have a couple really dumb charts that I'm going to fly through quickly because they're very low res, because I had to cut them down from a very large infographic. This is the reality, right? The reality is there's so many different actual positions and subsets. I got a little carried away with the asterisks, but it's because it was a very significant point. This example, careers in filmmaking, is just for feature films, just for live action feature films. Within a certain budget range, you get where I'm going with this. This is like just the most specific example. I'm going to break this down even further, but essentially, yes, you want to be a director, but think about all the roles underneath an assistant director. And I know, and also most of you I've seen are clearly studying film and media studies or production or interested in this. You already know all of this. But what I'm kind of here to do is to recontextualize some of this, of like how you actually translate the fact that there are all these different positions into working in this industry and in this field, and potentially other areas you might not necessarily consider when you're in school and you haven't gone out and worked on a production set or been somewhere. And so, yes, this is the reality. There's all these different roles that make up these different departments and teams. And this is just on a feature film. This is just on a live action feature film for the most part. So this is very fuzzy, but it's basically breaking down further. For example, you say you want to be a director. You have you considered script assisting? Have you considered script supervising? Have you considered being an AD first? Like, have you worked through, do you understand the levels that you go through and the different jobs you're going to build, the building blocks to get to a director? Have you considered story development? Have you considered what it takes to become a producer, the different types of producers? Many producers are not going to end as an executive producer. Many people will spend a huge portion of their life as a PM or a line producer. So understanding kind of all these different things that go into these specific roles, especially when you break it down further to actual physical production. Again, this is just live action production. This is on feature films. A lot of these carry over to TV sets, things like that. But there are so many different positions. If you love working in film and TV, are you someone who's artistic and good with your hands? Do you want to work as a set deck? Do you want to work in art department? Is that something you've considered? There are all these different ways. Are you interested, if you want to be a DP, do you want to start in being a grip or in the lighting department? Do you want to kind of work through those things? These are the kind of things you can consider when you're trying to figure out ways in, is where am I going to start? I know my end goal, but you have to kind of understand the building blocks that will get you there. And then there's post-production, which is often, people think about being an editor, but there's also so many different varieties of ways to work in post-production, with sound design, sound editing, music, visual effects. There's also entire swaths of people who work as simply what's called online editors, where you're taking a certain level of project to putting it on TV. There are all these different kinds of ways to find your way into the industry. And again, this is one very narrow subset of examples. And so what I kind of want to touch on, and I'm gonna try not to ramble too much, because I find questions are generally more beneficial than me rambling for like a full hour. But that's starting from the place of, if you're looking at the most rigid careers in film and TV, or the most, not so much rigid, but the most standardized, the ones that people think of and are most familiar with: writing, directing, producing, DPing, editing, all of those things. there are also all these other areas that you can pursue if you want to work within the industry and learn about the industry and build up skills and familiarity and just kind of general education of knowing how the industry works without doing any of those jobs. The examples I give, just to name a few, these are kind of areas of the industry that a lot of people don't consider working in, that are extremely relevant and will give you a ton of skills that will translate to all those things we just talked about, that will make you a better person on a set because you think about things that they might not. So for example, we were talking about, when some of you were here when we signed on, and we were talking about South by Southwest, film festivals, film and TV festivals, exactly what you're attending right now, Ampersand Festival, the people who are curating and disseminating films to people, learning about distribution. You'll learn through working at a film festival what it takes to get a film distributed, so that if you decide to make your own film, you're considering what are people looking for when they're trying to buy a film or distribute a film. You would get that from working in a film festival. You learn those kinds of how those conversations go by working at a film festival. Working in things like talent management and representation. That's another way that a lot of people break in, especially if they're interested in, bless you, I think I saw a sneeze. If they're interested in writing or in producing, working through a management company or a talent agency and working with other writers, working with other directors, working with other agents or managers, and building out networks and connections with those people. And again, seeing what people are looking for when they're signing talent, when they're working with companies who want to hire or represent people. You learn those sorts of things. Marketing in general is a huge I know it might not seem like it's going to be the exact creative career that gets you into writing, directing, producing, etc. But again, it's developing all of these skill sets that you can absolutely use, and it's building up connections within that industry, which again, I think is the thing that is ultimately the most important. Is, do you understand how the industry works? Do you know people who are working in the industry? And do you have the ability to connect with and sort of parlay what skills you have into those types of roles? And also, if you're someone who's really good, like business operations is a huge part of it. Who are the producers getting their money from? Who are the legal teams that they're consulting? Who are, financial analysts? If you're great at math, oh my God, does the film industry need you? Because I'm not. And most people who work in it don't like math and are not good at math. And so if you're someone with a business sense and a business mind, that's incredibly valuable. And there are lots of positions in business ops fields like finance, legal, all kinds of things that you can apply there. And again, a lot of this may not seem relevant if you're like, but my end goal is to be a writer. My end goal is to be a director. My end goal is to be an independent filmmaker. My argument is that so much of my career, so much of many of the careers of people I know, hinge on the ability to get what I would argue is what you're getting from places like William & Mary, which is a very holistic education, learning a lot of different parts and pieces and applying them together and being able to translate certain skills to relevant other parts of the industry. And I will say, I should have mentioned it up front, but an example I also use is I technically work, I don't technically work, I work at the Alamo Drafthouse, which is a theater company, in case people are not familiar. But I've worked in production, which my next slide will walk you through, kind of using me as an example. But I'm also a writer. I have literary representation for writing. So they're not mutually exclusive. You can do both. You can be a writer and have a day job until hopefully at some point the thing you want to do, if it's writing, overtakes that day job and you go, I can quit my job now because I'm working so steadily, I don't need to do this. But realistically, if you're someone, I'll use myself again, if you're someone who likes stability, if you're someone who is not like, I'm just going to pack up and move to LA and I have all the resources at my disposal to just try my luck in Los Angeles, a good way to start is finding a job that will get you some baseline skills that you can translate while you work on whatever creative pursuits you're really interested in, and build up really sort of a creative resume of like, here's the stuff I've been working on. So using myself as an example, this is a horribly cluttered slide, but I have had a lot of jobs. I've had a lot of jobs in the time that I have worked since graduating. And this also just tells you how quickly things can change in advance. Because I've been working, again, dating myself, 10 years. In 10 years, these are all the jobs that I've had. And so basically, I started at one company as a post-production intern. From that internship, I became a post-production PA, then I became a post-production coordinator, and then a post-production AP. So my initial experience was in post-production. I started in post-production at a small, production company, and then moved into my next role, which was again as a post AP. So I went from being a post AP at one job to a post AP at another job. And then I became an associate producer and then a field producer where I was going out, I was shooting things, I was running second camera, I was learning actual field production experience. And then a post story producer, which is a job that a lot of people have never even heard of. Story producing is a job a lot of people have never even heard of. It's traditionally used in docu or reality. And it's basically you're working alongside your editors to build out the story of the content that you're getting. So doing paper edits, things like that. It's writing, but it's also working with existing footage. From there, I went to my next company where I was an unscripted producer. Then I was moved into directing. Then I moved into development. And then I became a manager of development. So when I was in development, I was working on the actual putting together, pitching of shows, content, projects with external partners. So I've now moved like in just, about probably 5 years. I went from post-production to development. And I've now done the entire process of any film or TV production from development through post-production within 5 years of my career starting. And from being a manager of development, I became a creative director at my company where I was overseeing large swaths of our content development and then programming and development where you combine the two. And I'm basically planning all the things that we're releasing and developing all of the content we're releasing. And now I'm a director of creative services, and that is essentially kind of tying together all the different things that I've done, where I work with a team for the Alamo Drafthouse, where everything we do that is both video content or design content, anything we make that supports the marketing of films, anything we put out like that, my team makes, and I'm in charge of that. I supervise that, and I work with the studios to say, how are we going to market? How are we going to promote Thor: Love and Thunder? So that is kind of in just the 10 years that I've been working, I've worked in post-production, field production, development, programming, partnerships, marketing. And then in terms of actual types of content, I've worked on unscripted, documentary, scripted, animation, podcasts, and now essentially like in marketing executions, in actual promotional content for films. So it's a lot, right? It's a lot of different, I've had a lot of different jobs, and I might be maybe a little bit of an outlier. I don't think most people change jobs like every other year, even within their companies. So I might be a little bit of an outlier there, but each of the jobs that I had, I was able to take the experience from that job and parlay it into a different job with different sort of expectations and different areas of focus. But it was because I said, here are the transferable skills I have. Here are the things that I can do. And here's how they relate to this next job and how they're still going to apply. Even though I was coming from post-production, I now know I'm going to be a really efficient person in production because I will be thinking about post. I will know when I go out in the field, I'm going to think like an editor, which I think is incredibly valuable to anyone who's interested in production or field production or directing or producing. Really important to learn post-production, to at least have a sense of how an NLE works and like how to plan your cuts. Because when I'm in the field, when I've been on sets and I've been directing or I've been producing, I'm thinking like my editors. I'm saying, what coverage do I need, and what are going to be my transitions here? Whereas someone who's never worked in post-production may not think about those things because the editor's going to figure it out. I don't need to worry about it. And editors love people who've worked in post-production because you actually think about the things that they're going to need. So I think there's value in having, I think a lot of people feel pressure to, when they're graduating, know exactly what they want to do and start immediately there and go straight to their end goal. And that's great. If you can do that, that's wonderful. But also there is value in trying different parts of the industry and finding different ways in and learning different skill sets, because they do combine, they do add to each other. They do create a more sort of well-rounded employee, like person who can do multiple things. So Again, this is a very dense thing. I'm happy to talk about anything about my job or the jobs that I've had. But kind of where I wanted to go from here was just like, so that brings us to the question of when you're starting out, like when you're just getting started, how are you finding a way in, regardless of what it is? If you know you want to be a director, but you're like, that's a 10-year goal, or that's a 5-year goal, or maybe that's a 1-year goal for you. Where are you starting? And so for me, the big things are making sure that, especially if you're someone who is still in school right now and you're about to leave, and you feel like you haven't had a lot of opportunities to get, tangible, practical experience. You've been in school, you've been working really hard. I went to William & Mary. I know how it is. You're not exactly out there on sets all of the time. You're doing work you're working on maybe sets at school. But the goal is to, when you're building your resume, emphasize the skills that are not so. I think a lot of people have a tendency with their resume to get hyper specific and in some ways shortchange the experience they do have. So I think it's looking at what you've done and saying, what of this is universal? What of this relates to a lot of different types of jobs? What of these are highly valuable skills that everybody can rely on? And I think the good thing is, if you go to a school like William & Mary, you're already doing that. Your ability to meet deadlines, your ability to conduct research, to work under pressure. These are all things that are going to serve you really well. And so in not only the work you've done, your schoolwork, but in your extracurriculars, thinking about how you're positioning the things you've been doing extracurricularly. When I was at William & Mary, I was in AMP, which I think it's still called. Okay, because it was UCAB before I got there, just making sure it hadn't changed again. I was an AMP and I was the head of the comedy committee. And so when I was putting that in my resume, I didn't just say, oh, I worked at, our campus's programming board and I helped with comedy shows. You should be framing it like it's a job. You should be like saying that this is Alma Mater Productions is where I worked. And I was booking talent. I was maintaining schedules. I was, you should be presenting it with all the respect for the skills that you've developed there. Don't shortchange yourself. I think that's something that a lot of resumes I've seen from recent grads tend to do, is either they don't evaluate their skill sets on the basis of what they've actually done. They kind of look at it like, well, nobody's going to really take it seriously. And the reality is, it's completely reasonable when you're just graduating to have only a certain set of skills, or not even just graduating. If you're someone who's been working in a different industry for a really long time, to shortchange some of the stuff you've been doing. But I would argue, really think about how what you're doing is relevant to what you're interested in pursuing, and pick out the skill sets that make the most sense and curate it in a way that really sets you up to say, this is why I'm qualified. This is why I may not have done exactly what I'm applying for, but the skills that I have are transferable. And additionally, if you know you want to do one of those big 6 jobs, if you want to be a writer, a director, a producer, a DP, create a body of work for that. Like, that's something that's probably going to be ongoing for a really long time. For you should be, whenever you can, be making whatever that is. If you want to write, have a sort of set of scripts that you have that you can point to when you're pointing to a body of work. If you want to be a filmmaker, work on short films whenever you can. Build out a community of people who are going to help you in exchange. I'll work on your short film if you work on mine. There's a lot of that. But if you want to do those things, making sure that that is part of what you're doing and that you have examples of your work you can point to. Because for the most part, that's going to be probably the most valuable thing for you. Is if you want to make films, you got to make films. If you want to write, you have to write. Having those things be things that you have and you can point to is really valuable. And again, when you're thinking about, I want to be a director, not just, I think really breaking it down into digestible bites of, what kind of things do I want to direct? Do I want to direct documentaries? Do I want to direct feature length action films? Do I want to direct small, intimate family dramas? Like, really think about the areas of focus you want, because, and the reason, I know that can feel limiting, but the reason is all of those have different paths in, and they have different ways you can pursue those things. And they have different ways you can get transferable skills that are related to them, but not necessarily starting exactly in that spot. So if you want to be a documentary director, you probably can find some work in Washington, D.C. as a post-production PA, working on archiving footage and getting your foot in the door at a company that does, it may be you doing transcriptions for saying, I'm going to transcribe all these interviews that this company conducts. And that gets you at least, okay, now I have some connections at a nonfiction production company, and that will get you one step closer. That's different than if you want to work on action films where you're like, okay, I really probably need to see if I can work with, a stunt choreographer where I'm like an assistant to a stunt choreographer and I'm learning what their job is like. And I can come in with a lot of really strong expertise about stunt coordinating and stunt choreography. Those are very different things. And that may not seem like the first step if you want to work in an action film is to focus in stunt choreography. And it's not really, that's not the only way. But the point is thinking about breaking down what you want to do into smaller pieces and then finding left of center or slightly, different ways to approach them, because pretty much everyone you talk to, it's going to feel like when you talk to people in your major or even out of your major, everybody wants to do the same thing. I want to write, I want to direct, I want to DP, I want to, edit, I want to do these things. But I think once you break it down into more specific areas of focus, you can actually start looking for what are the trails that lead off of this and what are the off the beaten pathways that I can get in. And there's less competition for that. It's more accessible when you start looking at these alternative paths. And then there's like obvious things, like if you are interviewing, make sure you're doing your research, who you're talking to, what they make, kind of where they're coming from and what parts of the industry they're involved in. Try to give specific examples when asked for questions. And again, don't undervalue the experience that you do have. I think that's something I see a lot. And to that earlier point, like I don't know any two people who have gotten into the industry in the same way. Everybody has a different path in. And I think that if you allow yourself that to know that it's going to take time, unless you're one of the very lucky few, there's always exceptions. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that. You may have a friend who's like, I moved to LA and I got a job as a PA and now I work for an incredible director and he's going to make my movie next week. That happens, I guess, but not frequently. And it's not the norm. And I don't think anyone should expect that. I think knowing that everybody's going to have a different path in, you're going to find a different way in, give yourself the grace to figure out what that is. And to also know that just because, and this is what I say next, take any opportunity to learn what you don't want to do. Just because you're taking a job that feels like it's not what you ultimately want to do, doesn't mean that's a bad job for you to have. I think a lot of people put a lot of pressure on young people, grads, people transitioning careers to immediately find the perfect job that's going to satisfy all the things they want. Realistically, I don't think that's necessarily fair. I think you should find jobs that you say, what I'm going to get something from this. It doesn't have to be everything out all at once. I'm going to get X practical skill, or I'm going to get exposure to this part of the industry that would be valuable for me to know, or I'm going to meet people who will have this area of expertise who can recommend me to people who I ultimately want to work with. I think that's a really important way to contextualize when you're starting out, how you're going to find a way in. And again, I know it sucks to hear. I hated hearing it when I was an undergrad, but it is about networking. This industry, more than any that I've ever talked to anybody about, is about connections. It's about finding people who know people and will put you up for things. Almost every job I've ever had has been by way of recommendation. It has been through someone saying, oh, you're looking for a candidate? I know someone who's really great. You should talk to Hannah. She feels like she'd be a great fit for this. Or it's me seeing a job that I wanted to apply for, going, oh, I know someone at that company. Let me ask them if they can talk to me about the position, or if they can recommend me to the recruiter, to just ask them to take a look at my resume and see if I'm a good candidate. And frankly, even more specifically, if you want to work in production, if you want to be a crew member on a production, all of that is by recommendation. It is, I know a guy who recommends this person. It's almost never, if you're going to work on a field production crew, it's like very rarely a resume. It's literally just, I worked with this guy last week as a PA. I think they're ready to, level up to be an AD, and here's the work they've done. Like, let me tell you that they're good for it. So part of that is being, again, thinking about what you're doing, who you're working with, what network you're building. And really, again, I think a lot of it is working with your peers. Like, I think a lot of people are very focused on how do I become friends with the person above me who's going to get me a job. But a lot of the times it's the people you're already in your peer group who are going to find jobs, and you're already on the same, you're kind of all in it together. They're going to be the ones who are going to recommend you. And I think a lot of people sometimes, it's easy to forget that, is that there's a lot of people going, how do I get this person to mentor me? Or how do I get this person to, put it, who's at a higher level than me? How do I get them to advocate for me? And that is important. But I actually think for many people, especially people where it's like, my friend moved to LA and they got a job as a PA, like that might be the friend who can say, I'm now getting promoted. I'm moving on to become a coordinator of development. Now we need, a development assistant. Would you be interested in this? Like, I know you're smart and great. I would love to recommend you for it. So staying in touch with people you've worked with or you've collaborated with in school or in extracurriculars or in other fields you've worked in. I can't stress enough that that's really important. And I promise I'm almost done rambling. And then basically once you're hired, this is just kind of an afterthought, but I think it's important, is always being mindful of your next steps. I think there's a sense of, especially if you're like, okay, I want to be a director, but the first job I got offered is in marketing. And I don't really want to be a marketer. I don't want to work in marketing, or I don't want to work in social media, promotions, but that's the job I have. That's the job that's been offered to me. And I need to eat. I need to pay rent. Those are very real and legitimate reasons to take jobs. Always thinking about, okay, how, like I said on the previous slide, like, how does this job, what can I get from this job? What skills, what connections, what sorts of things? I'm going to look, I promise when I'm done rambling, I want to go back through the chat. There's some great stuff in there and we'll talk about it, and then we'll do Q&A if anybody has them. What am I going to get from this job? What practically can I get from this job that I could extract from it and put on a resume to get to the next jumping point that's closer to what I want? So for me, it's about, I think it's important to recognize, very rarely, unless you have a really great manager, which there are some, but I will say from experience, a lot of managers are not great. It's unfortunate, but it's true. So you're going to have to advocate for yourself. You're going to have your career goals in mind. You're going to have to think about what you want, thinking about, okay, if I'm here in a year, what does that look like? If I'm here in 3 years, what does that look like? I don't want to be here in 3 years. How do I make sure I've graduated from this job in 3 years? What does that look like for me? What are the benchmarks I need to set? What experience do I want to get by the time I hit the 3-year mark? Having a really concerted idea of what all these things are, I think will help you stay focused and progress in whatever job it is, and to make sure you're proactively and meaningfully getting what you want from the job. So that's something that's really important to me when I'm talking to people who are just starting out, is like being really like conscious of what you're doing and why you're doing it. The jobs you do take, even if they're left of center, if they're not exactly what you want to do, but they're in a related industry, how do you make it relevant? How do you make it valuable to yourself? Staying aware of like how the industry is changing. I mean, from now to when I started, it's a completely different landscape. Streamers were not in place when I was starting out. Twitch did not exist. The level of the shortening, I mean, the pandemic has changed huge amounts of things. Like now working in film distribution and theater, placements, learning about the shrinking windows between, Disney says you have 17 days to get people into theaters to see a movie before we put it on Disney Plus. Things like that, being aware of that and how that's shaping the industry and what kind of jobs are popping up because of that is also really valuable. So being kind of aware of the ecosystem of the industry that you're interested in, I think is really important. This is a very granular, stupid one, but if you're going to freelance, which is how a lot of people start out, taking care of yourself, making sure you're setting aside like parts of your paycheck and knowing how to negotiate freelance rates can be really difficult. I was freelance for the first year or two that I was working, and making sure you're saving for your taxes. These are things that, unless they've started teaching them at William and Mary, they don't tell you. They don't tell you about when you're freelancing, how to handle your saving for taxes, because they don't take your taxes out when you're freelance. They don't tell you how to negotiate for pay rates and how to research what market values are for things. So doing that kind of research to know what you can ask for, what you can value, things like that. again, getting comfortable negotiating and communicating. For me, the reason I've had, like, I didn't even count how many different roles I've technically had, but the reason I've had that many different jobs is that I got really comfortable advocating for myself and negotiating when I felt like I was being given new responsibilities. If I was taking on more responsibilities and taking on new parts of my job, I got to the point where I would be like, okay, we're now talking about a new job, and I'm comfortable coming to you and saying, I deserve a promotion or a title change or whatever the case may be, because you're asking me to do more things. I think especially if you're someone from a marginalized group, that's really hard. But finding people who will support you in that and giving you the skills to be able to advocate for yourself and to negotiate for those things is really important, because that's how people continue to be underpaid for the work that they're doing. A thing that is really helpful with all of that is tracking your roles and responsibilities and credits, making sure you're keeping an actual log of all the stuff you're doing. So, because it's very easy when you've been working in a company for a year, by the end of that year to go, what did I do here? I did so many things here, and now I need to put it on a resume, and I don't actually remember all the stuff I've been killing myself doing for the last year. So if you take on new projects, or if you're doing new skills, like making notes of, like, I just have a running document. Whenever I kind of check in every so many months or once a year, even at least, to say, what am I doing right now? What are the skills I'm working on? Or what are the responsibilities I have? So that I constantly kind of am aware of where am I at? And it lets me then go, where am I going? And so the final thing being, never stop building your network. Always start, keep in touch with the people you're working with, and making sure you're building that community, because that's going to be who's going to continue to get you hired. So I've rambled so much. I'm going to go through the chat now, because I've seen some questions in there. I'm going to go from the bottom up. I can definitely figure out a way to share any of the stuff I've talked through today, if it's just the presentation or some of the infographics, if that would be helpful. The question was, and please feel free to add more questions to the chat. I'm just going to go through the chat and make sure I answer anything people have said already. How do you know when is the right time to transition jobs? Have you found that you have felt ready? Yeah. Here's the thing. Most of the times that I've changed jobs, it has been, I have felt ready because of there's something that's telling me it's time to go, or it's time to change. I think of it like, it really depends on you as a person. I very much am the kind of person who, I describe myself, this may not be a good metaphor, I feel like a shark, where if I stop swimming, I will die. Like, I have to feel like I am constantly learning and growing and being challenged. If I get complacent at a job, if I feel like I've learned everything there is to learn, if I reach a plateau in my experience or the things that I'm learning, I'm like, it's probably time for me to leave, because I'm not getting anything from this job. And I think that's really important to remind people, is like, you're getting more from a job than just your paycheck. The paycheck is obviously the most important thing, because it's what you need to survive. But it's a two-way street. The job is extracting labor from you. You should be extracting value from your job beyond just your paycheck. It should be experience. It should be connections. It should be all of these things. And if you reach a point in your job where you're like, I'm just getting a paycheck now, and I've learned everything I can learn, I've kind of met all the people I can meet, there's no upward mobility for me here, I've kind of reached a plateau, that's usually when I'm like, something needs to change. I either need a promotion, I need to move into a different department, or I need to find a different job. And that's when you start, I think you'll feel ready from a standpoint of, I've gotten what I can from this job. I will say, I never feel ready to leave a job. It is terrifying. Quitting a job to take on, especially if you don't have another job, is terrifying. So I think that's normal to feel anxiety about, like, should I leave my job or should I change jobs? But I think if you go through that checklist of, like, have I learned? Am I still learning? Am I still being challenged? Am I getting new skills that I need? That will be a good barometer for you. I'm going back up, and then I'm going to come back down. We have a question. I know there's a bunch of editing software out there. Which ones have you run into the most and think is the most valuable to master? It really varies. Different types of productions use different NLEs and different editing software. For the most part, the two that I run into the most are Premiere and Avid. They're used very differently. Premiere is probably the safest, because generally just being familiar with the Adobe suite is going to be really valuable to you, regardless of what job you have. Just knowing kind of Illustrator or Premiere or After Effects, like, depending on what part of the industry you're in, that's a good place to start. There are a lot of companies that are just Avid. It really depends, but there's enough that if you are adept in one of them, like if you're really skilled in Premiere, you'll have a baseline to start with if you get a job at a company that requires you to use Avid or to use a different NLE. But those are the two that I encounter the most, that people work out of. I'm just looking back through to make sure, would a summer production intensive be useful for your resume? Absolutely. For talking about your skills and experience? Absolutely. I think you should be marking down kind of all the skills you're developing in the intensive, just what you've worked on. I think it's a very valuable thing because it, at least in anything you can show that demonstrates like practical experience, you don't have to be paid. It's just like, what skills have you developed? So I totally think that would be useful to indicate in your work. And I think also a lot of times, like, you don't have to break things down. And this is an offer I give totally open to people. Like, I will happily review resumes. If anybody wants to send me resumes, every year I offer to give out my email and look through a resume if somebody wants me to look at it, and I can give you feedback on it. Because I know it's really hard when you've never kind of done a resume before, or you're a student and you're like, maybe I'm underselling myself. Like, I'm happy to do that. And to look at what your resume looks like. So I'll drop my email in the chat before we go. Okay. And I think I'm back up to the everybody introducing themselves and talking about themselves. So I'm going to go back down to the bottom. Great question from Curtis. Do you have to be in one of the stereotypical places, New York or LA, to build a good network? How do you build good network connections when you aren't able to be in one of those entertainment industry hubs? That is a very great question. And it's something a lot of people feel a lot of anxiety about. I'm in Austin, Texas. I was in Washington, D.C. before I was in Austin, Texas. I got my job in Austin, Texas because of someone I knew in Washington, D.C. There are people all over the country who work in media. The hubs are changing all of the time, especially post-COVID, especially now, or not, we're not post-COVID. Well, anyway, we're still in COVID, where people are coming out of it to varying degrees. Production has always been in a COVID world, so that's going to continue. But in the fallout of COVID, in the aftermath of seeing what COVID has done, remote work has become so much more normalized. Editors in general, I know so many editors who work remotely now. It does not matter where editors are working from. It really, one, kind of depends on what job you want. There are certain jobs that I would say, yeah, to get really far into it, it will benefit you to be in LA. It will benefit you maybe to be in New York, but it is not, in my opinion, in most people's opinions that I've talked to, at least starting out, it's not mandatory. It's just, you may have more opportunities. It's a bigger pond with more jobs. So there's just more to go around. But Austin has a lot of jobs. Louisiana has a lot of jobs. Atlanta has a lot of jobs. North Carolina weirdly has a lot of jobs. They're starting up because a lot of, like, again, it really depends on what you're willing to do and what your experiences are. A lot of YouTubers are moving to North Carolina and building small production companies out of North Carolina. There's like all different kinds of places you can work and get that base level of production experience or content experience or marketing experience, whatever you want to do. And again, you could work in marketing. You could get these transferable skills from marketing or from, a advertising agency, or from lots of different smaller companies that exist in every market, that you can relate to the bigger industries. Now, obviously, if you want to work in physical on-set production, you probably need to live in Atlanta, or you probably need to live in Los Angeles. That doesn't mean you can't find smaller sets or smaller shoots, like, again, doing commercial productions wherever you live, that could then give you a skill set that you could eventually take. But like, yeah, there's some things that they're always going to be based, like physical production. The most of it is happening in Los Angeles or Atlanta, or now New Orleans, Louisiana, and now some in Arizona. But it's changing all the time. The tax incentives are changing all the time. This goes back to what I was saying, keep up with industry news. New Mexico is now adding huge incentives for film. Stranger Things is going to be shot. There's like all kinds of stuff where if you're staying abreast of that kind of stuff, you'll see, okay, maybe this is closer to me where I am now. But yeah, you don't have to. I'm also not going to lie and say it's not beneficial to be in those places. But I think there's a lot more leeway now. And the reality is you can work with people in your hub where you are, or the place you are, who have connections to those people. Where if you say, I've been working in, I've been in Missouri and I've been working at an ad agency in Missouri or whatever, and someone I work with there was in LA for a while, they could still recommend you to someone in LA if you decide, I'm ready now with 3 years of experience under my belt to move to LA. Can you put me in touch with people? I think it's better to get that foundation under you, build a small network, and then leverage your network to make a move later on when you're more settled. That's just me. That's because I have 2 lawyers for parents who were very terrified when they found out I wanted to go into film and TV. And I craved stability. So I was never going to be the person who was going to pack up the minute I graduated from William & Mary and move to Los Angeles. It was not going to be me. So it really depends. It depends on what you want to do and kind of what you're interested in. But the short answer is, I don't think so. I don't think you have to be in those places to find work and to build up experience and build a network. And I think anything you can do online, if you're a writer, finding writing groups, if you're a short filmmaker, connecting with other filmmakers online and offering to exchange reviews of cuts. Like, I would love to watch an early draft of your cut if you would watch mine, and we can give each other feedback. Like, that's the stuff that's going to be really valuable to you. I'm so sorry I'm rambling so much. Okay, so Olivia, hopefully I'm getting your name right, is from Dallas. Film opportunities are slim there. What kind of internships or opportunities would you recommend? It kind of goes back into what I was saying. It really depends on what you want to do, particularly in film and TV. Even if the pickings are slim, like, I think it really is about, like, do you want to, and you don't have to give me more information. You can if you want. Do you want to produce? Do you want to direct? Do you want to edit? Depending on what you're interested, what skill sets you're interested in developing, finding jobs that are in Dallas that can get you those skill sets. So if you want to produce, say, looking into coordinator positions or assistant positions at ad agencies, where you can get experience working on delivery of content. It might be commercial content, but you're delivering cuts, you're dealing with tight deadlines, you're working with clients, you're meeting client needs. All of those are things that are going to be relevant to a job that you might take then if you wanted to be a coordinator at a production company. So it's kind of looking at, like, what jobs are available in your market. It could be, and it sounds like a lot of people would say, like, this is not a good idea, but, like, you could be an assistant at a wedding cinema or wedding videography business, because I would imagine in Dallas that's probably pretty big. So saying, I want to work on, if you want to be a cinematographer, getting videography experience, and then using that and taking the money you're making from that job and hopefully saving enough that you could make a short film. It's that kind of stuff. It's not ideal. And that's the thing I want to make sure people know is, like, I'm not saying it's going to be, you're going to feel like, I made it, I'm doing great immediately out of graduation. I think that's unrealistic, personally. I think that's a lot of pressure to put on people, that you have to get out of school and immediately have a job that's, like, perfect for you and does everything you want it to. The goal for me is, like, getting those footholds that let you work towards the thing you want, and knowing that it's going to take a little bit of negotiation here and there to build out the skill set and build out the network that you're looking for, especially if you're not in one of those hubs that you might ultimately want to be in. But yeah, hopefully that's kind of helpful. Hopefully that explains that. Claire asked, what skills would you suggest developing for marketing and content jobs like mine at the Draft House? What you're fascinated by the process of what draws an audience to a particular film. Especially for marketing and content, if you want to work in social media, if you want to work in anything that is content driven, first and foremost, being just a ravenous consumer of the thing you're really interested in. So if you are someone who wants to work, like, a Draft House, a huge part of, like, there's an entire department in our company that's the programming department, who are the ones who are going out and essentially are film buyers, where they're saying, what do we want to show and why do we want to show it? And how do we think we're going to get audiences to come to the theater to watch these movies? And so they have, their job is to curate what films we're showing, and they get to decide, like, how much, based on what we know about this film, we're going to talk to the marketing department and say, you really should leverage this. You should really put a lot of effort behind this. So for that job, it's like, you really need to love film. You need to be really invested in film. And I think generally that's, like, a starting point, is, like, figure out what you're passionate about, and then find ways to, like, make sure you have that skill set really locked down, of, like, knowing what you're talking about, being really passionate about it. Again, that's, like, industry research, being up on what's working, especially if you work in social media. Like, algorithmically or performance wise, what is working? What are the things that are performing? If you're going to be leveraging different platforms like TikTok or Twitter, like what works on Twitter, what works on TikTok, be a consumer of those things and know how to talk about them. I think that that's like communication. That sounds like a really dumb skill, but like being able to say you worked cross-functionally, like with a team of 10 people who all had different jobs. If it's using AMP again as an example, or the flat hat or whatever, like, you know, I was responsible for this one area of the organization. For me, it was comedy. So I was on the comedy committee, but I had to work with 7 other departments to make sure we were all leveraging the budget appropriately. So showing that you can work with multiple teams who have different goals and objectives, that's really valuable. There's a lot of different ways to find those, like, it's just something that over time you learn like how to contextualize your skill sets. But I think like really being engaged in the thing you're focused in, being sort of like an industry expert on whatever you want to be doing, knowing the platforms or the things you're going to be utilizing, but then also demonstrating those in practical ways. Like, here's what I'm interested in. I love film. I was in the film committee for Alma Mater Productions, and here's what I did with that. Here's how it was practical. Here's how, you know, I could relate that to this job that I'm applying to. And a lot of it is looking at the job posting and seeing what skills are they looking for? How can I provide direct examples of what I've done that's comparable, even if it's not exactly the same. Not just saying, I read your thing and I'm regurgitating. You said you want someone who's a good communicator. I'm a great communicator. You need to be able to give examples of like, I'm a communicator because I worked with 30 different people to meet X deadline. That's a better example than just saying, trust me, I'm a good communicator. That's the kind of stuff that I would say is helpful. If you have a stage or working name, should you use that for introductions or resumes instead of your legal name? I don't think that's confusing. I just think be consistent. I think if you know you want to go by a certain name for your working career, you go by that. And most jobs are not. I think that would only become not even an issue. It would just come up when you're being hired, where if they need to take your intake paperwork and they're like, oh, you have a different name here than you do there. I don't think that's an issue. It's really just something you talk with the people team when you're getting hired and go, just for your information, this is the name I go by, and here's the name that's on my paperwork. But I think it should be consistent. Just like use it in all places, on social media, on your resume, on your LinkedIn, everything you have, just make sure it's unified. I think that makes sense. Okay, I've been rambling. I think we've got maybe 5 minutes left. Does anybody else have any questions? I was trying to talk fast so I can make sure I covered everything. I would love to know if anybody else has questions. If you want to unmute and ask it, please, by all means, or just drop it in the chat. Otherwise, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to put my email in the chat so that if anybody wants to send me their other questions, if they're not comfortable asking them now, or if they want to just follow up and ask me resume questions, there's my email. Please feel free to message me. How would you recommend keeping a schedule for practicing your personal work? That's a great question. Is a very difficult struggle. If you are a creative, I think the thing that you'll find is that, and I would imagine a lot of you have already dealt with some of this as undergrads or as people with careers that you're maybe considering changing. It's really hard. I think it's finding how you work best. Are you a morning person? Are you a night owl? Are you someone who works best in short bursts? Or are you someone who works best under pressure? Do you work best with an accountability partner? Like figuring out what motivates you. Are you someone who the Pomodoro method works really well for, or does that do nothing for you? Like, I think once you know kind of if you want to pursue personal work and you know, I work best, you know, in short bursts, I can work for 15 to 20 minutes uninterrupted. I'm going to get up 30 minutes early. I'm going to make myself a coffee or a cup of tea. I'm going to do a writing sprint for 20 minutes, and then I'm going to answer emails. And if I feel like writing more, I'll set another sprint and I'll write another 20 minutes. But I think it's not a one size fits all for everybody. It really depends on what your personal method of operation are. Like a lot of people I know are like, I would rather, you know, work from 11 to 1 a.m. and just do it at the end of the day when all my other stuff's done. A lot of people are like, that's when I'm doing all of my homework because I wait till the last second, so I can't do it then. I think it's also making sure you're setting aside time. Like if you know I think it's setting deadlines for yourself and then getting people to help hold you accountable for them. So it's like, if you know your goal for the end of the year is I want to have produced a short film, setting smaller, more digestible milestones of I want to have the script done by March, and I want to have the shooting location locked by April or May, and then I want to have a table read in July. Like setting digestible goals for that personal work, so that you kind of have, you're not just like, I want to have a short film done in 6 months, and then you're kind of like working towards this very amorphous goal. I think having, again, it's kind of the theme of my entire ramble today, is just, breaking things down into digestible, achievable goals and building on those, because I think that's going to be, I think a lot of people you'll just get fatigued and you'll get worn out, and you'll just be like, I can't do it. I want to write a script and it's been a week and I have 2 pages and I'm never going to write 90 pages. How am I going to do it? So I think taking things in smaller chunks, giving yourself attainable goals, and giving yourself a schedule that you can do. Like, don't try to operate by anyone else's schedule. If someone's like, oh yeah, every night I sit down at 8 p.m. and I write for 4 hours, it's like, couldn't be me, could not be me. So I'm very happy for you, but that is not how I work. And everybody works differently. So giving yourself, the grace to say, okay, what's going to actually work for me is kind of what you got to do. So yeah, I'm still, if anybody else has questions, like, please let me know. I don't want to keep people. I don't know what time we're at. But yeah, I hope some of this was helpful. I hope, like, at least hearing from someone who was not even a film major when she went there and has been working for 10 years. And I got to write a don't talk PSA for the Alamo Drafthouse for Taika Waititi last week. That was cool. Like, that's the kind of stuff that, like, you couldn't have told me 10 years ago I'd be getting to do that. So there's a lot of unexpected ways you can find careers in this industry that aren't just, I want to be, one of these very strict categories. And that's kind of what I hope you take from today, is like, there's a lot of different ways you can work in it. You will be able to work. You will be able to get a roof over your head. You will not necessarily have to be a starving artist. That was what my parents were very afraid of. So here's a voice from the other side saying it's doable, but be patient with yourself, be realistic, and don't hesitate to ask for help. I hope if there's stuff I can help with, please don't hesitate to reach out via email, and I will be of any assistance that I can, because I think it can be very scary when you're in Virginia or in some of these other places of being like, how the heck do I get anywhere I want to go? But you can do it. So hopefully that's a little piece of encouragement to go into the rest of your day with.